friends, thanks for joining my channel. Namaste and Aap Sab Kaise Hai? I'm fine but a bit nervous because today I would love to talk about the speech of Dr. Shashi Tharoor in the British House that he made of the reparations, Great Britain, the British Empire, or India. I've seen this speech, the 8 minutes of his speech, several times, again and again, and I wanted to say, give you my point of view, how I feel about it, and what I think about it, because I'm not from Great Britain, I'm from Germany. That makes in this way nothing better. Definitely not, because we have a history as well, and I'm not proud of, but this I will explain after this speech. I want to talk about that in any case, as I have seen this speech, I'm happy that I'm not from Great Britain, and that makes a difference, and I would love to explain you after we have seen this all, and I give my comments in between and at the end here. So let us see this fantastic, incredible speech of him. He is so much well educated, so much funny in between, that he got the whole attention from the people. That is really important, that he not only make a speech, he make it like a bit in a funny way with so much right points that they are fascinated and speechless in this way, because he is in every point right. So let us start before I tell before so much, and I cannot stop it and forgot to see the video right now. So let us start.
Madam President, and gentlemen, ladies of the House, standing here with 8 minutes in my hands and at this venerable and rather magnificent institution, I was going to assure you that I belong to the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking, that as Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. But now finding myself...
He started in so much great way with these funny things from his life,
in what must already seem a rather long
but he has to say so
like
much
Henry
more.
VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention to the arguments that were advanced by the opposition today. We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway suggesting, challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England. That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer, went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. Meanwhile, colonialists like Robert Clive bought their rotten boroughs in England on the proceeds of their loot in India, while taking the Hindi word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him. By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy. 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, what happened was that a compensation of £20 million was paid, not as reparations to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. I was struck by the fact that your Wi-Fi password at this union commemorates the name of Mr. Gladstone, the great liberal hero. Well, I'm sorry, his family was one of those who benefited from this compensation. Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43, simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. Let me take World War I as a very concrete example, since the first speaker, Mr. Lee, suggested these things couldn't be quantified. Well, let me quantify World War I for you. Again, I'm sorry, from an Indian perspective, others have spoken of other countries. 1/6 of all the British forces that fought in the war were Indian. 54,000 Indians actually lost their lives in that war. 65,000 were wounded, another 4,000 remained missing or in prison. Indian taxpayers had to cough up £100 million in that time's money. India supplied 70 million rounds of ammunition, 600,000 rifles and machine guns, 42 million garments were stitched and sent out of India, and 1.3 million Indian personnel served in this war. I know all this because, of course, the commemoration of the centenary has just taken place. But not just that, India had to supply 173,000 animals, 370 million tons of supplies, and in the end, the total value of everything that was taken out of India, India, by the way, suffering from recession at that time and poverty and hunger, was, in today's money, £8 billion. You want quantification? It's available. Second World War, it was even worse, 2.5 million Indians in uniform. I won't belabor the point, but of Britain's total war debt of £3 billion, in 1945 money, 1.25 billion was owed to India and never actually paid. Somebody mentioned Scotland. Well, the fact is that colonialism actually cemented your union with Scotland. You know, the Scots had actually tried to send colonies out before 1707. They'd all failed, I'm sorry to say. But then, of course, came union, and India was available, and there you had a disproportionate employment of Scots. I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie has to speak after me. Engaged in this colonial enterprise, as soldiers, as merchants, as agents, as employees, and the earnings from India is what brought prosperity to Scotland, even pulled Scotland out of poverty. Now that India is no longer there, no wonder the bonds are loosening. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized.
This is a really important point.
They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain. And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. Instead, in fact, the Indian railways were built with massive incentives offered by Britain to British investors, guaranteed out of Indian taxes paid by Indians, with the result that you actually had 1 mile of Indian railway costing twice what it cost to build the same mile in Canada or Australia, because there was so much money being paid in extravagant returns. Britain made all the profits, controlled the technology, supplied all the equipment, and absolutely all these benefits came as private enterprise, British private enterprise, at public risk, Indian public risk. That was the railways as an accomplishment. We're hearing about aid. I think it was again Sir Richard Ottaway who mentioned British aid to India. Well, let me just point out that British aid to India is about 0.4% of India's GDP. The government of India actually spends more on fertilizer subsidies, which might be an appropriate metaphor for that argument. If I may point out as well, that that as my fellow speakers from the proposition have pointed out, there have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience. So there is a moral debt that needs to be paid. Someone challenged reparations elsewhere. Well, I'm sorry, Germany doesn't just give reparations to Israel. It also gave reparations to Poland. Perhaps some of the speakers here are too young to remember the dramatic picture of Chancellor Willy Brandt on his knees in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970. And there are other examples. There is Italy's reparations to Libya. There's Japan's to Korea. Even Britain has paid reparations to the New Zealand Maoris. So it's not as if this is something unprecedented or unheard of that's going to somehow open some sort of nasty Pandora's box. No wonder Professor Lewis reminded us that he's from Texas. There's a wonderful expression in Texas that summarizes the arguments of the opposition: all hat and no cattle. Now, if I can just quickly look through the other notes I was scribbling while they were speaking. There was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it. We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
The opposition spoke quite highly of Greek and Athenian democracy on which the West should pride itself, and spoke of liberty and equality in that same name. The Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave society on
All right, I don't think that needs contradiction, not from me at any rate. But if I may just point out, I think the arguments made by a couple of the speakers, the first speaker, Mr. Lee in particular, conceded all the evil atrocities of colonialism, but essentially suggested that reparations won't really help. They won't help the right people. They'll be used as a propaganda tool. They'll embolden people like Mr. Mugabe. It's always nice how in the old days, you know, I'm sorry to say that the people of the Caribbean used to frighten their children into behaving and sleeping by saying Sir Francis Drake would come after them. That was a legacy of that. Now it's Mugabe will be there. So this is the new sort of Sir Francis Drake of our times. The fact is very simply, sir, that we are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. And I am quite prepared to accept the proposition that you can't evaluate, put a monetary sum on the kinds of horrors people have suffered. Certainly no amount of money can expiate the loss of a loved one, as somebody pointed out there. You're not going to be able to figure out an exact amount. But the principle is what matters. The fact is that to speak blithely of sacrifices on both sides, as an analogy was used here, a burglar comes into your house, ransacks the place, stubs his toe, and you say, well, there was a sacrifice on both sides. That, I'm sorry to say, is not an acceptable argument. The truth is that we are not arguing specifically that vast sums of money need to be paid. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned, the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry, will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed. Personally, I'd be quite happy if it was £1 a year for the next 200 years after the last 200 years of Britain and India. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I'm sure they're already shocked at that time. What I have to say now? I make a paper with somewhat small details. I can talk about some details for sure. But I want to start with the last point. The last point is that he say that a sorry is the important thing that I have to say. And that I can understand. Because, you know, I'm from Germany. I grew up last century. I was in school. My teacher taught me so many years about our German history. So the Holocaust, what Adolf Hitler did, what the German soldiers did, how we go around the borders in complete Europe to Russia, and when it's possible to more countries, Africa as well. But there was never in your country, there was a fight between Japanese and your people. Because of Great Britain, they fight against Adolf Hitler. So it was a big world war, everything was included. And these lessons I learned in my childhood, that to feel guilty. Guilt about what happened, what our grandfathers, grandmothers did, what Adolf Hitler did. The man was, by the way, from Austria. He was not a German, but he was a great speaker. So everyone blindly, not everyone, for sure not. But the most German and other people follow him blindly. And that is a matter of fact, that they follow him and they close their eyes what happened as he got so much more power year by year. Because, as Dr. Shashi Tharoor said, you got so much roads, railways. Yeah, in Germany we as well. There was no unemployment here. And so people, when they talk about the past, there's cuts both ways. They talk in different way because the ones said, oh, we got so much roads, highways, trains, train station, railways, because Hitler make it that soldiers can go from here to there and bring their goods from here to there, that we can go faster over the borders, because he prepared the Second World War. That's it. But we have no unemployed people here. So that is happen in this way. And to see the truth, what we learned in our childhood, as I was small, as others were small, until now everyone in Germany learned it, that it is our guilt, that we have to pay for, that we owe so much nations money for the people they died and the properties they lost. And what we did and cruel things in the Holocaust, as we bring the Jewish people and other religions and everyone, Germans, Hitler didn't like how they look like, bring in the concentration places, Lager, wie sie sagen, Konzentrationslager, that and kill them so fast and horrible, in an absolute horrible way. And for this we pay. For this the last generation paid, for this our generation paid, and the future generation will pay as well. I do not know if it's paid any time. I pay for what happened in the past, what my grandparents did. And it happened to the whole world. And in any case, I will say for sure we owe the world so much. And in the same way I can say that the British Empire owe you so much. It is not only money, it is respect. They owe you the respect to say sorry, because that is the only thing what I learned in my childhood from my parents, that to give the respect to others, to say sorry what happened. I cannot give you, I can give nobody euro, 10 euro, 20,000, whatever. Okay, and then I do not find any longer guilty, or this kind of guilt. And when people from Great Britain do it in this way, it's not that they pay for their guilty, because when I know it right, they never know or learn in school to feel this guilt, that they make something bad in your country, because they never learned to feel this kind of guilt, because they are so much happy to have your goods, your raw materials, all they got, and that they in this way are a rich country. They have now from this kind of richness nothing, because They have only their small island, and the economy is not perfect. They have so much problems. You see it right now with the coronavirus as well. But they never learned to feel sorry for what they did in the past, because you are not the only country that go as a British Empire in and take everything and are not able to give anything back. They are not able of. But the point is, everyone in this country has to give you the respect to say sorry what happened. For sure, not the most of the young people have something to do with it, but they participate from this. In my point of view, because I participate now from nothing, from the German history, because everything in Germany was completely destroyed. And our mothers built it again, because our fathers were in Yale, in Russia, in America, in Great Britain, wherever. There wasn't there. So our mothers rebuilt Germany. That is a big story for Germany. And then there comes the economy again, the factories, and make so much good things from made in Germany. But there is, from this past, from what happened before 1945 in the Second World War, nothing we have to be proud of. And that the British people are proud of what they did in India to make you slaves, take everything and show you that you are not equal. That is a big difference. There is so much arrogance, and you will never see, in my opinion, German citizen, someone from Germany who be this kind of arrogant, because we are not in this way. We didn't grow up to be this kind of arrogant or show it, because there is nothing to show this arrogance. And that is definitely a point for us. We have learned from our history, from our past. And everyone who grew up now here, I hope they learn from the past and do not forget. And you should know one thing, what we really hard learned, that as we were in small kids, teenager, whenever, we go with our teacher in a group, with a class, to these places, concentration lager, Holocaust places where so much 1,000 million people died. It is now here actual museums, places of history we have never to forget, never. And it is a horrible place. It makes not goosebumps. It makes speechless. It makes... That is a place to feel guilty. Yeah, definitely. And in this way we grow up. So, that is my point of view, that Great Britain has not these places of feel this kind of guilt. They have only the things they got from your country and happily take in this way. And that is what I wanted to say. I cannot go on any point because I'm sure he researched everything well, and his 8 billion the British Empire owes India is definitely not too less, definitely not. But I wanted only to say that my point of view is to understand that I understood what happened, and the only thing that I can give to you is the respect that I understand and that I feel guilty for the Second World War, and that so much people die. That is right, that I do. So you have definitely my respect, as all other people in the world as well, because all are equal. All are equal. No one is less or more. And if I'm a whitey or not, who cares? When I'm black or red, yellow, native, Indian. I grew up here, so that is my package I have to live with, and you have your package. And I appreciate India a lot for everything, what they did in the past, how strong they are, what they do now, how much great are your country comes up for everything. Yeah, you are lovable. Definitely, you are lovable. You are a big country. You are 1.5 billion people, and we are so much small here, and wanted to say so much. We have 82 million people in Germany, and we are thinking that we are so much great and important, and you have so much more voices. So shout out, say everything you want, and you have not to ask for sorry. You have only to get it from everyone, especially from the British Empire. So that was my point of view. That's definitely the end. I have nothing more to say. I wish you a really great day. I hope I come back soon in your beautiful country, and I hope you all are well there. Don't forget to subscribe my channel. I would love to hear more and to talk about these points more. I hope that you find my point of view interesting, how I explained, because that was really important to me to talk about this kind of topic. Okay, that's for now all. So don't forget me, come back again soon, and have a great day. Yours, Angie from Germany.